Welcome to the very first episode of the Dart Coding Challenge. Now you might be asking yourself, what on earth is the Dart Coding Challenge? Well, I'm going to tell you. This is an opportunity for you to test your skills. I'm going to give you a series of problems that's going to escalate slowly, harder and harder to tease and test your brain and to grow your coding muscle. At the end of this, you're going to be able to do things that you didn't even think possible, and better than that, you're going to find that your ability to think about applications and programming is going to have increased exponentially. This is going to work by me giving you an application and the criteria needed for that application. After I give you the criteria for the application, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and solve this problem completely on your own given the specifications. Now, if you get stuck, don't worry. I am going to provide a hint section. And if you just can't get past the hints, I am going to provide a link in the description below to where you can find one or two solutions depending on the problem. Do not let ChatGPT or Bing or Copilot or whatever tool you want to use do your thinking for you. Unless you learn how to think about coding, you are not going to be able to use these tools in the right way. You need to think before you can use. Think of ChatGPT almost as you would a junior developer. You don't get to manage a junior developer until you're a senior developer yourself. I don't consider looking at official documentation cheating. I don't consider asking a question on Stack Overflow that isn't just straight up solve the problem for me cheating. I don't consider talking to your friends or family or a chat room cheating. But I do consider having a language learning model solve the problem for you, or alternatively, copying in a whole program from another course. I consider all those things to be cheating. Our first problem this week is going to be quite simple. If you're a beginner, this might be a little challenging. If you're advanced, you're going to solve this in no time. It's going to require a little bit of thought, but overall, you should be able to get this if you apply yourself. Here's the specifications of the program. I want you to use the Dart create command to create this application for you. Don't do it by hand. Save yourself some time and effort and use Dart create. You are going to write a program that through the terminal or command line asks the user to input a random sequence of numbers. There must be more than 6 numbers and less than 50 numbers. Then, using any coding methodology you see fit, your job is to reverse the order of those numbers. So the first number becomes the last and the last number becomes the first. If you had a number input 1337, 1337, the expected return output would be 7331, 7331. Then you need to display the number back to the user in the command line. If the user inputs less than 6 digits or more than 50, you need to prompt them again. Do not let the application just close with invalid input. If the user enters a non-numeric code, you need to prompt them again, preferably with a different message. Be sure to use individual functions as often as possible in this program. Create functions to execute the different parts of the program. Now remember, for this coding challenge, you want to focus on your best practice, but the main goal is just to complete it. If you complete this, you will have solved a problem on your own. And once you've done so, you're welcome to look at my solution, which by the way may not be perfect either. We are all always growing. So that's it. It's simple and it's easy. Now, your job is to pause the video and execute this program on your own. Now, keep in mind, you might think this might only take 10 or 15 minutes, but if you're just learning, you might spend an hour or two on this challenge. Just rest assured that for that entire hour or two, you are creating synaptic networks in your mind that are going to make all future coding challenges just a little bit easier. So be patient, don't give up, and allow yourself the time to do it right. If you've reached this part of the video, you've unpaused, which means you're either done or you need a hint. The first hint is that Dart has a library called I/O, which stands for input, output, or in and out. This I/O library can be used to capture input from the command line and write output to the command line. You might want to explore standard out, STDOUT, dot write. You also might want to explore standard in, STDIN, dot read line sync. Tip number 2, the do while loop can be a great way to continue looping until input criteria can be met. Okay, so you're back for hint number 3. This hint is to recommend to you that the for each loop might be very useful for parsing through each character of a string individually. Notice that I said string and not integer. This is actually very important. If you didn't know this, each character of a string can be accessed by putting the variable name and then inside of brackets a number. The number 0 would be the first character, the number 1 would be the second character, and so on. Great! I hope against hope that you've solved this problem. If so, please let us know in the comments how you did it, and if possible, provide a link so that we can see your solution. Now here's my first solution. I actually came up with two solutions for this problem. The first is using a more low-level approach, not using all of the wonderful functions that Dart has built in. This might be closer to the way you would solve it in a language like C. So you're going to notice that I used the Dart create function to create this project, which means we have a bin folder, a lib or library folder, and a test folder. The bin folder is going to contain the main code that executes when you type Dart run in your command line. The library folder is going to contain, in this case, the functions that we're using inside of the lib. The lib folder is going to contain the functions that we're using inside of our bin file. And as you might remember from a previous video we did on unit testing, the test folder is going to contain some tests so that we can see if our application works or not. So let's see how we solved it. Well, the first task that we needed to accomplish was to get our data from the command line. So you're going to notice I created a function with type string, which means it's going to return a string called getNumber from command line. We created a string called number. I don't know if you remember, but I said storing it as a string and not an integer is very important. It is far easier to manipulate a string than an integer. For instance, how would you take the first number of an integer and put it on the end? That would require a lot of mathematics, which I don't really want to do. Whereas if we convert it to a string, we can merely access each character as mentioned as if it were an array or a list. So then we're using the standard out library, which you can see we're importing here as Dart.io, and we're writing a message that says input a number with between 5 and 50 digits. Then we have a loop here that is repeatedly asking the user for input until conditions are met. So if you'll remember, the conditions are it has to be 6 or greater. So we're going to want this loop to keep going if the number.length is less than 6. Alternatively, if number.length is greater than 50, we want to return a different error message. And if the number is not numeric, we want to return an error that says, error, please enter only integers. And you can see that this while loop executes while the number is empty, or the number length is less than 6, or the number length is greater than 50, or it's not numeric. You'll notice I'm using the exclamation point to say not. So you'll see that we have a function here called isNumeric. Let's scroll down and see how we created this function. We made a bool because we want to return true or false called isNumeric, and we're passing it a string. We're just calling the string str in case we want to use this function elsewhere in this application or port it over to another application. Then we're using a regular expression. Now, if you don't understand how to do regex, this would be a great opportunity to use ChatGTP or any other resource to have them decode this for you, because this lesson is not about teaching regex. So we're checking if there's a match in our regular expression of string. And if there is, it will return true. And if there isn't, it will return false. This regular expression basically just checks to see if there's a match for anything but numbers. If we go back to our bin, that the first thing we're doing is we're using the getNumber from command line function, and we're storing that string as a number. Then we're creating a string called reverse number, and you're going to notice we're using another function here called reverse order of characters in string. So this is the main crux of the problem, probably the part you had the greatest challenge with. So let's go back to our lib, and you'll notice how we solved this. I mentioned in the hints that a for loop or a for each loop could be a great way to iterate through every character in a string, and you can access it in this method by using a bracket and a number. So here I created a string called buffer, and we've created a for loop that starts with int I equals the string length. So how many characters are in the string? We're going to do this while I is greater than 0, and then we're going to subtract I once each time. Because remember, we want to go to the end of the string and work our way backwards. This is a little different from most of the for loops you've probably seen before, which are iterating forward instead of backwards. And then you're going to notice we're concatenating onto our buffer string I minus 1. Now remember, we're doing I minus 1 because if you'll recall, arrays or lists start at 0. So everything will be 1 behind. And then with this function, we're merely returning our buffer. So let's test this application so you can see how it works. Since we used Dart create, we're just going to type Dart run. We have our bin folder and everything. Let's see, input a number with an integer between 5 and 50 digits. So let's put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And as you would expect, our number reverse is 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Now, I don't know if you watched the video on creating unit tests, but I did create some unit tests. Let's just see if this passes. We're going to run Dart test. It's going to take a second to load. All tests passed. So let's take a quick second to look at our tests. Now, I want to iterate to you, in this challenge, creating tests is optional, but it's great to get in the habit of creating tests as you are developing your application. Let's take a look. We created a test called isNumeric, and we're just checking our isNumeric functions. So if isNumeric input is ASD, blah, 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 it's going to return false. If isNumeric is a number, it's going to return true. Obviously, we know that those are correct since we ran our tests. Then we're going to run another test called reverse number. So if we input 1, 2, 3, we're expecting 3, 2, 1 back. And if we input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we're expecting 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 back. And you can see all these tests passed. So this is our first solution. If you'd like to see how we solved it using a little more inbuilt Dart functionality, come back for solution number 2. And by the way, if you notice something on this solution that inspires you to go back and correct yours, please do so. The point isn't to punish you or make it difficult, it's to have you think and then learn. Because if you've really thought through the problem, whatever I've done in my solution is more likely to inspire you and stick inside of your mind. We are back with the second solution to this Dart coding challenge. As you'll remember, I said this one was going to feature more of Dart's built-in functionality to simplify things and make it easier for us to execute. Now let's look at this. We still have our bin, our lib, and our test folder. Now let's go ahead and look at our main void function. We're going to see that it's basically the same. We're still running get number from command line, we're still reversing the order of characters, and we're printing out our output. However, let's look at our lib and see how we might have done things differently. So if you'll notice, the get number from command line functionality is basically the same. That worked well, and honestly, I couldn't think of a quicker and easier way to code that was also easy to read. But let's look at isNumeric. isNumeric is also basically exactly the same because it doesn't get much simpler than checking for a match in a regular expression. Of course, for writing the regular expression itself. Those are actually kind of tricky. Let's look at the string reverse order of characters inside string. This is where our challenge takes a turn. We created a function with type string because it's going to return a string, and we're passing it a string called str. So you'll notice here we're creating a final list. That just means we're not going to modify this particular list. And we're taking our str variable, we're trimming it, which means we're taking the white space off the front and the end, then we're splitting it by this character, we're converting it to a map, and we're running int.parse, and then we're turning it into a list. Now, why are we doing all this? Well, it's just a fancy way to get it into a list formatted in the way we want, because Dart has some really cool list functionality. Notice, we have a final variable here called reversed, and we're using list, we're using the method reversed, and then we're turning it back to a list to make sure it displays properly. And then we're returning reverse.join. Now notice, I left a note here that join accomplishes this while stripping the brackets from our list. That's why we're using the join function, to return it into one easy to use, easy to read string. Now, do you see why I did these versions separately? The other has more general programming knowledge, whereas this one has kind of weird, if I'm being honest, Dart syntax. But it works, and it works well, and it's quick. So you can understand maybe the difference between using a framework and programming in general. The skills that you need to program in general are going to apply to all languages. Tricks like this, particularly really bizarre method chaining, is something you're going to have used Dart for a while to learn. So I wanted to present both of these solutions. So thank you so much for joining the first Dart coding challenge. I'm going to post a link with our solutions in the comments. I highly encourage you to go visit the page, read through our solutions, but also leave notes or comments with information on how you solved this. Is there a way that I could do this better? Is there a way that you found to creatively accomplish this task? Or did you figure out some really cool idiomatic Dart code that we can use? Either way, I want to hear from you so bad. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you can find it in your heart, I would so appreciate a like, a subscribe, a thumbs up, a comment, anything to let us know that you're watching the channel, but more importantly, how I can do better. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next coding challenge coming up soon.